Uh,
Beauty. Okay, so welcome. People are still coming on. That's fun for us. Who knew it would last 7 weeks here? So Jordan, Trev, and I kind of chatted a little bit on like why we kind of started this thing or the roots of why we were kind of here and trying to get a better idea of where we want to go and grow. And we mentioned this a little bit in the invitation to you guys, but obviously we're not really sure. We're still flying by the seat of our pants. Um, but people keep showing up, so that's fun. But really, it's the people that are contributing consistently on here, and it's that S&C community that we think is adding a bit of a specialty to it, where Jordan, Trev, and I really want to probably do least amount of speaking and just kind of hear from you guys more than anything. And we decided for this one, based on the fact that right now, as everyone can probably contest, there's so much overload in information and free conferences, and a lot of it is really, there are some good culture ones, but a lot of them are really on acute variables and exercise prescription and that type of thing. And we wanted to go a bit of a different route, discussing topics you can't really get from textbooks or research articles, sharing experiences that have molded us as coaches, and then a couple things coming down the pipe, like how that's changed the approach of our training, but also providing a platform for theories and some tech gadgets to be challenged. And those are some topics we're going to talk about hopefully in the coming week. So look for that. Um, Obviously, we know they'll get bit of a grind from Trev, so that should be fun, if not anything else. But above all, I think just giving a voice to the S&C community and better understanding of how we can work together, to improve the industry, the way we're valued, and the pathways needed to make that happen. So that's kind of our goal on the outset. And obviously, we're a part of the CSCA, and we really want to see that succeed. So bringing in a couple of those elements as well. So we decided to talk a bit about sport coaches. And because as strength coaches, we spend a lot of time, I would say, starting off in the industry. If you're just starting off, you'll spend a little time as you get through, but scratching your head as to why sport coaches do the things that they do, and initially maybe not agreeing or having an understanding or not making sense of it or thinking they're off their rocker sometimes. But I think it's important for us to be reminded that just because it's not backed by a million research papers doesn't mean that it doesn't work. And we just haven't seen it before. Or the culture or the buy-in tidbits from coaches can really help you be a better coach. And sometimes listening is a better decision, and observing is a better decision. So we're going to start off a bit with Jordan, and then I know Steven and Sheldon have to leave at 1:30, so I'm super interested to hear some of their stories, as I know they have lots. Um, and then Chapman, I think you could probably fill 7 sessions of these, so I'm super excited because you work with also some of the most obscure, cool sports, and we share some of them or have shared some of them, and I'm interested to see some of the overlaps that we've probably both heard or seen. But and then we're obviously going to open it up and hear what other people have. And Ian, especially being in that sports coach role, I think for quite some time, playing both sides. Like I'm pretty excited to hear maybe some of those stories as well. But we're going to start off with Jordan. He's going to talk a bit about roles and relationships and give us some good stories on that end. So let's hear it, Jordan.
okay, thanks. We'll see where this all goes. We were kind of asked to prepare. I kind of did, kind of didn't. But here we are. A couple things up front: working definitions, principles, that kind of thing. I believe an S&C coach, for the most part, is an assistant coach that focuses on strength and conditioning. And we need to keep in mind that sport, the athlete, the team, all of that exists without us. It existed before us, and to a large extent, they don't necessarily need us. But without a coach, an athlete, or a team, there's actually nothing for us to support. Not saying that we can't make it better. I'm not saying that at all. But I think that we need to understand where we fit into it all. I scribbled down a few here. And also the context, like I said, assistant coach that specializes in S&C that I come at this from is I have coached sports as well, like hockey, rugby, track and field. Those are the only ones that I've done at a legitimate level, I would say. The other ones are kind of like rolling out the ball and figuring it out as it goes. But once you get into that role where you're in charge of everything and not even necessarily performance related, but necessary, booking the buses, schedules, meals, any of that type of stuff. Like these are all the things that are important to a sport coach that you may not even think about when you're presenting your next periodization model that you think is going to cure the world. The fact of the matter is, if the bus is not booked, you're not even getting to the game. They probably care more about doing that for 10 minutes than talking to you. So that's kind of how I think about it and when it fits in. One coach that I'll talk about first, and then I'll talk about a group of coaches, is a guy that I worked with, and I'm going to say a bunch of good things, so I feel okay naming him. Only a couple people probably know who he is Craig Taylor. He's a triathlon coach that I worked with in Guelph. And I want to say he's probably the best or one of the best coaches that I've ever seen. He would never ever say that. And he tries to do as good a job as he can from letting people know that almost. The reason why I think Craig is so good is that he wanted everyone to be involved. He wanted it to be collaborative, and he didn't care about taking any credit. He assembled a team around him where he wanted everyone to know what their role was, but our roles actually ended up being defined by everyone else. So our IST was mainly the coach, myself at SNC, we had a physiotherapist, and a bike fitter, actually, of all people. And whenever an issue came into us, essentially what would happen is we would all decide to defer to one person. So it would never be me saying, yeah, I got this. It would be the bike fitter and the physio saying, I think this is more in Jordan's wheelhouse. And Craig was just so good at facilitating that within that group, and the group is pretty open to it and not wanting credit, all that type of thing. So it really, really worked. And what I learned from that was it's important to know your role amongst the people that you're with. My role working with that triathlon group was a lot different than my role working with Guelph Griffins football at that time. I was the exact same person. It was the exact same time period, but my role was different. I needed to accept my role, and the coach helped facilitate that role. So that was a huge one that I learned from him. As far as it doesn't really matter who comes up with solutions, as long as the solutions are met. And then a group of coaches that I worked with in track and field, three of them mainly that were all at a really high level, working with athletes that were all in the top 8 in the world in track and field, which is super legitimate. In any other sport, they kind of say like getting in the top 8 in track and field is it's similar to getting a medal in a lot of sports because it's so difficult to do and it's so difficult to remain at that level. And the lessons that I learned from these coaches, three of which were very diverse, is really get in tune with what they care about and how you can actually do that for them and their athletes. And when I was working with these coaches, I was the exact same person. I was working in the exact same place. But I realized that one of the coaches, their main thing was they wanted to be in control of the program. They wanted to be in control of what was happening. So my job was to make sure that I supported his athletes and kept him informed. Okay. Obviously, double role there of maintaining a relationship with the coach as far as keeping him informed, making sure that he feels like he's in control, and then developing a personal relationship with the athletes so that you can actually support them on the ground floor of it. A different coach that I worked with, again, in the exact same setting, was he just wanted me to make sure that I supported his athletes, do every single thing that I could for his athletes and use my judgment. But what I told him, it was very important to him that his athletes maintained autonomy, but that they felt supported for anything that they needed to deliver world-class performances. And he didn't really care if he knew or if he didn't know. But he trusted in that the practitioners that were working with his athletes would inform him as is needed. And then the other coach, this was one actually, I don't think Ed's on here, but that Ed really challenged me on. I had no idea what was important to the other coach that I was working with for a long time. And as far as X's and O's goes, we really clashed. We clashed. It would have been impossible to think more differently about things than we did. And, you know, after many meetings, Ed was really good, and Sheldon at times too, but it was more often Ed and Pierre. Those of you that know Pierre, supporting me on how to deal with this. It's kind of like, well, what is he really, really good at? And the guy cared more than anybody. So after a while, I essentially said the best way for me to actually support this coach and his group and his athletes is to show that I care about what he cares about most and what he's best at. And it was to care for his athletes. And the reason why I brought up this whole group as an example actually is because it's probably one of the biggest pivots that I've ever done. And those of you that know me at least fairly well, it's almost unbelievable what the outcome ends up being. Um, and in a way, somewhat embarrassing, to be very honest. That's kind of why I'm sharing it. Was I didn't know how to show that I cared for his athletes that were doing things that, for whatever reason, I didn't agree with. So after a while of racking my brain, I just said, you know what, like I'm going to put the track and field stuff aside, and I'm just going to make sure I say hi to every single one of them every day and say their name. And I did that for a long time, and all of a sudden the athletes felt more supported. Um, and the coach was more open to talking X's and O's. So it's kind of ridiculously simple, and somewhat embarrassing that that's even an action point that somebody in my position would have had to take, but that's what happened. And that's the reason why I kind of relay it as such. So those are my two ones about kind of knowing your role and how you fit in, and not to be subservient or underneath when knowing your role, but just knowing how you fit into the piece, and then just the importance and acknowledgement of the relationships that exist and how those are formed. And I also wanted to present, I have some easier ones that I could have talked about that went better, but I'm a fan of presenting the imperfect case study because that's the way it goes. Over and out, Sam.
Nice. Thanks, Jordan. I think that seamlessly moves really well to some of the stuff that Sheldon wanted to talk about in terms of unique coaching styles and how you have to adapt, or what you can learn from those unique coaching styles that don't typically fit into the paradigm of what you're typically used to coaching, or the environment that you're typically used to coaching in. So I'm going to pass it off to Sheldon, and he's got something to share. So I've just made you a co-host there, Sheldon. So
thanks, Sam. It's just pictures. More better than looking at my face. Jordan, that's funny. It's interesting that you mentioned Craig Taylor. He and I were actually roommates when we were creating the Triathlon Canada certification program. Craig and I were roommates.
I knew you would know him.
I had a lot of chance to work with him. Super nice guy, really humble guy too, but extremely knowledgeable when it comes to triathlon coaches. So that's awesome that you mentioned him, you called him out. Very cool. I wanted to talk about these two gentlemen in terms of coaches. So the thing for me, looking at it, is I have a wonderful opportunity to learn from coaches, and I really go into that relationship with that sort of optimistic attitude that I, just like the coaches teaching the athletes, I have a great opportunity to also learn from them. And some of the greatest learning opportunities I've had are simply by standing beside a coach and just listening to them interact with the athletes. And that individual on the left, the figure skating coach, Louis and I had a chance to work with a lot of Skate Canada athletes in the 90s, one of which is this athlete there who was a two-time Olympian. And for me to stand beside Louis and hear him, even just through workouts and routines, he would be able to identify, even before she took off, if a quad was going to become a triple or a triple was going to become a double, just by looking at it in real time. And I mean, I used Dartfish for years in terms of some video analysis stuff, and he would be able to tell me what the video was going to show, which was phenomenal. And just being able to understand what he was looking at and how he would be able to identify one jump changing and transforming from another was phenomenal. The one person that I do want to talk about more is the person on the right, Adrian, who is a boxing coach. And again, I grew up watching and being a massive boxing fan in the 70s and the 80s. And for me, still, arguably, Muhammad Ali is the greatest athlete that ever lived. And I really followed his career, in addition to some amazing Canadian boxers that were, doing really well in the Olympics and internationally, like Lennox Lewis, Sean O'Sullivan, Egerton. These are all amazing Canadian boxers. They were all coached by Adrian. And in 2001, I found out that he was actually teaching the NCCP coaching certification for boxing. So I jumped all over that opportunity and went through the process to become a certified boxing coach, and only because he was teaching the course. And again, similarly, being able to actually learn from this man, phenomenal experience. And he, 15, it would be 15 years later where I had the chance to work with one of his athletes. And he was not a science guy. He was very old school. His first Olympics as a coach was Munich, 72, and he went to 72, 76, 80, 84, 88, in terms of multiple Olympic games as a coach in a row. So he was not a massive science guy, did not really care about the data. And he found out one of his athletes had actually reached out to me independently to see if I could help coach her. And I agreed to meet Adrian and the athlete just as a way of a preliminary discussion. And he didn't really know who he was going to meet until he walked into the door and saw it was me, the person who had taken his coaching course 15 years earlier, and remembered a lot of the dumb questions I was asking him at the time. But the first thing that Adrian did, and this is at the CSIO, is he came up to me and he gave me a massive big hug, because he already knew that I cared about the sport, and he already knew that I cared about learning from him. So it was an amazing opportunity, an amazing relationship that I had with him. But again, I was doing a lot of the testing and training of his athlete, and I ended up being the last Olympic athlete that Adrian coached. But he didn't care about the data. He would tell me based on how he could hear the contact of her hitting pads and hear the contact of her hitting her opponents, whether he knew that we were working on the things like it's turned to speed and strength and power that he wanted to work on. So again, everything that I learned from these coaches was all about coaching in terms of listening, looking, and feeling. Nothing to do with data, nothing to do with testing. It was everything about being as observant as you possibly can. And we know that our ears are fallible, our eyes are fallible, but just in terms of being beside them and learning from them without any technology was absolutely a phenomenal experience. And I mean, if I'm imparting sort of a message to any coaches who are coming up, is take the opportunity to just learn and listen. Don't go into a relationship with a coach trying to tell them or teach them what you know. Gravitate to them as your teacher and educator, and learn as much from them as you possibly can. And I do have to apologize. I will have to pop off this meeting in a few minutes, but I do thank Trev, Jordan, and Sam for allowing me the opportunity to share. Thanks, guys.
I really appreciate that, Sheldon. And one thing that brings to mind is a massive mistake that I made pretty early on was, we want to put reports together and data together and be really proud of how the progress we're making in the gym to our coaches. And you put it up in a nice package and then you give it to the coach and you're all excited and they probably don't even read it. So I think that, that goes a long way of understanding what is it that your coaches actually want you to be achieving. But also how can you actually achieve or speak to them, right? Like, how are you going to write to them? How are you going to, if you're going to put a report together or try and give them information, like what is it, in what way do they actually want it?
Well, I mean, I think one simple question is asking them beforehand, do you want a report? In some cases, the answer might be no. And then what you say is, well, what information can I provide for you? How can I help you? Because we're there to help them as much as possible.
One of the things, I'm not the host, I'm going to hijack, that Sheldon always talks about, and I've tried to promote it with S&C coaches, is take some coaching courses. Do the NCCP stuff or do whatever. Hang out with coaches, and whatever you want to call them, friend or foe, you got to know them. Like, figure it out. If that's who you're supposed to support, do your market research. And in order to do that, you got to be around coaches. The most coaches you're ever going to find, coaching courses. I'm out.
So I know Steve has to leave. He's got 10 minutes. Sheldon, can you just give a brief update on the PSO Phase 1 return to training, if there's any update on that, if that's quick or not, and if not, we could follow up next week.
Yeah, 30 seconds, less than 30 seconds. It's NSO updates. Again, we're only allowing Olympic targeted athletes to train in the facility. We were going to look at the 27th, which is next Wednesday. We're pushing that back to June 1st. And a few of us are actually going into the facility to the CSIO tomorrow to map out and lay out this facility. And at this point, again, we're only going to be allowing 6 athletes within the 5,000 square feet at a time.
Thank you. Steve, what do you got for us? I know you got some good nuggets in there.
Can you allow me to screen share?
You should be good.
Okay, thank you. Give me one sec. I'll just keep this one slide on. I don't know if you guys can see that. You good? Yeah, I think for me, one of the bigger pieces for me in my development was working with quite a few of the people pictured on the bottom there. Early on in my years at York, being able to watch Charlie Francis coach, Marion Jones, Colin Montgomery, who they were dating at the time, watching just how he coached things and literally just allowed the horses to run, would look with his eyes, give them 1 or 2 cues, and that was it. And I think early on in my career, that was the biggest piece that I learned, was not to talk too much, was to say very little, say 1 or 2 things, allow it to sink in, and just see what kind of motor changes the athletes would make based off those things. And obviously, the more enhanced the athlete, the easier it was to just give them 1 or 2 cues and let them figure it out. I think that's the biggest thing, though, is let them figure it out to the young coaches out there. I think oftentimes when we're doing interviews, this younger person will come in for an interview and we ask them to do a practical portion, and they say about 30 things to cue one exercise to an athlete. And very quickly, I'm lost after the 5th cue. I'm waiting for them to just shut up and just demonstrate, say 1 or 2 things, and let the athlete figure it out. So that's a big piece for me, is the coaching and the cueing, and not to overcoach and cue. For me, I'll give a story about the bottom right-hand corner, which is Dr. Stephen Norris. And my first exposure to him was early on at Hockey Canada camps in 07, 08, where he would come in and do presentations to us, and I would literally just fill up notepads. He's a great speaker, but at the same time, just knows how to make a point, is very intelligent, and you take a lot away from him. But sitting in boardrooms with him, taking a look at player profiles, and this is almost the opposite of what Sheldon said, where we have this massive database on each athlete, and you're basically looking at just all the parameters in which we want these hockey athletes to be, their body composition, their energetics, their VO2 max, their blood lactate levels, looking at their curves on various tests that we've done, strength and power tests, and literally just going, okay, this athlete, good enough here, work on these things this summer. Like really fine tuning and taking a look after each testing bout, looking at their blood work, looking at their body comp, and really taking a fine tooth comb on each athlete, and really narrowing down as to which athletes needed which areas topped off. We're dealing with some athletes who had been to 3 or 4 Olympics, and really what do we want to, get in their last quad, and what was a big focus maybe in their final world championship year going into an Olympic event. So I think that was a big experience for me, was really learning how to profile athletes, use the data that you get from testing, but then using that data to actually implement change. I think a lot of coaches will test, but they're not really looking at the data and really fine tuning their approach as they train an athlete throughout a quad. And for me, that was a big learning curve initially as a young coach, was learning how much the metrics sometimes do matter, especially when the gap between one and another, an athlete and another, in making an Olympic roster is finite at best. And really taking a real good deep dive into the data that you're getting each testing about, looking for any outliers, but at the same time making sure that you're really fine tuning and topping off certain areas on athletes. And there's been a few that we're kind of like, all right, strong enough, fit enough, maintain. It's very few, but there are a few that we get to that point, and Laura Fortino is one that I remember most, that would just almost have a complete profile where, Steve Norris couldn't really pick it apart. He was like, yep, she's good. Just keep her where she's at. And let's, maybe fine tune one or two areas, but that was it. But there's very few athletes that have complete profiles like that. That's all I'm going to say.
So I have a follow-up question for you, Steve, and Trevor might be able to chime in here because I know he's worked a lot with wrestlers in the past. But I guess one of my questions is, in general, do you think that there are certain types of traits where you could be like, yeah, that's a wrestling coach, or like, yeah, that's a track coach, in terms of the way that they interact with you? And I know there's anomalies, but I find wrestling very interesting. I've had very minimal exposure. And I was never participated in as a kid. But is there something unique about wrestling coaches that are different than a lot of other coaches that you've worked with?
I think for the most part, the wrestling coaches have all wrestled. It's a very unique sport. It's one that really pushes the boundaries on resiliency, and they go through a ton of injuries. So I don't know. For me personally, the wrestling coaches I can think of, Dave McKee at SFU area, like Burnaby, BC area, and then obviously Marty Calder's our coach. They all are pretty tough warrior-based mentality coaches. Really trying to bring a sense of recovery as an approach for their athletes is almost unheard of, right? So a lot of, like, they all demand the same things. They want their athletes fitter, stronger, more powerful, but they really take a liking to certain sport or certain lifts. Olympic weightlifting obviously is a major tool that we use with our athletes here at Brock. But no, and a lot of them, what I find most with a lot of senior level coaches is the periodization is very fine tuned in their head. It's trying to get them to parlay it to you is sometimes a difficult task. So the more you spend time in their environment, the more they get to trust you early on, the more they'll kind of share as to what their approach is, and really create a strong collaboration with you as far as training athletes goes.
Do you have anything to add on that, Trev? Thanks so much, Steve. I know you got to head out.
Yeah, I got to head out. Thanks, you guys. Have a great day.
Not really much more than what Steve mentioned. It's kind of like that culture thing. In football, wrestling, you get that culture of just get it done, hard work, no fussing. Yeah, I know it hurts, but keep going. I guess is a little bit different than you get from other environments. It doesn't mean that they're insensitive. It's just this expectation that you got to push yourself a little bit harder than everybody else. So honestly, I was not around the coaches that much. Kevin, I think, is on the call. Kevin, are you here? What's the difference with a wrestling coach compared to some of the other coaches you've had?
Yeah, I'm here. I don't really know. To be honest, what the answer is. I spent basically my whole life with wrestling, but I kind of thought that was normal. So I'm kind of getting exposed to new sports over the last couple of years now in a bit of a different role. But again, it's not as an athlete or as a coach. The two things I kind of saw more often. I spent a lot of time with Trev as an athlete. So yeah, sorry, I don't really have much to add there.
So the cauliflower ear is not a normal thing?
I thought everyone got it.
Everybody's got it. Yeah. That's what tells them apart.
I actually have an answer for Kevin. I have an answer for Kevin because he told me when I started working with a wrestler, it was a piece of advice. And then all of a sudden I was in with those guys. Was in my experience, and the two coaches were Doug Cox at Guelph and Zoltan Hyundai, I think you pronounce it, something like that. They're like super hard, like HAF to the max, but they seem to not care about anyone more than the rest. Like the one wrestler that's like scrapping to win the match so that you win the team battle is as important as the Olympian. And there was a moment where I was starting to work with a guy from Trevor, from Sam, that was buddies with Kevin that was an Olympian. But the only thing that won them over was when I was like, yeah, he can bring his buddies to train, bring his training partners to train. And that was what got the wrestling coaches on board. And Kevin was actually the guy that said, like, yeah, once you said that, you're in. And then all of a sudden I'm having meetings with them and in the position to be telling them what to do as far as planning their weeks and their schedule and go to a training camp, not go to a training camp, all because I cared about the guy that was like, honestly, the one guy, I don't even think he was wrestling competitively, but that's what the wrestling coaches cared about. Like, they're so hard that all they care about is the one person that's scrapping right now. Whereas I've seen in my experience in other sports, coaches become a little bit more infatuated with some of the high level performers at times.
Interesting. So Chappie, I got one good story that I'd like to share, but I'm going to save it because it might line up maybe with some of the stories that you're going to share. But I'm interested to hear kind of some of the experiences that you've had that would allow you to have 7 sessions of coach learning.
Good thing. Can you give me a screen share here? We got it.
So many co-hosts on this here. Yeah, you're all
As
good.
you guys know, I love talking and sharing, but I do love hearing from other people too. So I don't want to dominate a lot of these. Trev, haircut, bud. How'd you pull that off?
Taught my son.
Nice.
I cut his hair. He thought I did a good job. Said, well, I'll teach a man to fish for the rest of his life. I got to buy him a better set of clippers, though. They're kind of dull. But yeah, not bad, eh? You like that? The wings are gone. I could do you next. How's your hair going anyway? It's
a mess. I'm in the biblical phase with it down. Like Moses, Jesus.
No good, hippie.
Yeah. Okay, so I tried to keep this to as few. And reflecting back, a lot of this both stemmed from 08 post-Beijing. So my first full team was actually given to me by Steve Lidstone. So he had laid a lot of the groundwork, and this is, does anyone know who this is? I'm actually curious.
Looks like a trampoline guy.
Yes. This is arguably the greatest trampoline coach in the world of all time. He lives in Richmond Hill.
Build his own trampolines? Is it that guy?
Yes, this is Dave Ross. This is a Canadian national team coach. Runs a gym called Sky Riders and builds trampolines from scratch. He's a physics engineer. So he has won more Olympic medals in this sport than any other coach. It was in the Olympics in 2000. Between these 4 athletes, there's 7 Olympic medals. And the first thing I learned is that you need to create an environment for greatness. And similar to, I don't know if anyone's watched Last Dance.
Oh, yeah.
Kobe says, without MJ, there is no Kobe. So on the left here, you have Rosie McLennan, 2-time gold medalist, but without Karen, 3-time Olympic medalist, there is no Rosie. And then in the middle, you have Jay Burnett, who won silver, and then without Matt Turgeon, who won bronze 8 years earlier, there is no Jay. So building an environment where the next generation looks up and it's like a snowball over time. And just watching that for years. I was involved with this team for 8 years. Gets to a point where you don't even coach. The senior athletes are coaching the junior athletes, and you've created this cycle. So watching this and watching the mentorship that these athletes gave the next ones that actually did better than them. And Karen and Rosie competed. They competed against each other. So even though they're 2 amazing friends, they were also enemies on the battlefield. So it was fascinating, and Dave facilitated this culture. His goal was to create an environment where all the best in the world are, and he would pull in athletes from around the world. He would be coaching, Japanese, Germans, Chinese, whoever, and he would have an open gym policy where some of the best athletes, you can come train at our gym. I don't care what country you're from, you're our enemy. You're going to make our team better, and I'll help make you better, which is going to make the sport better. I learned this real quick. They don't give a shit about what you know until they know that you care, which has been said numerous times already. Dave's business hours are from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. That's when he gets work done, so no one bothers him because we're all sleeping while he's working, and so there's no distractions. He coaches in the afternoon till about 8 p.m., 9 p.m. a.m. and then goes to work. So when Steve passed them off to me, I had to go meet with him. Obviously, I'm going to go meet with the coach. And I had to go meet with him on his hours. So I had to go to the trampoline club at midnight. It's a test too. What is this guy going to show up? Is he going to come meet me during my thing? And it took a few sessions of doing that before he's okay. This guy actually cares. He's coming to meet me at super late night when no one else is working, because that's what I asked, and it's the coach's show. What am I going to walk into a multiple Olympic medal winning program and do? I'm going to do what they want me to do. And then this was a motto I learned early. I'm pretty sure it was Steve heavily influenced me on this one. Going into everything with a plan. There's no excuse not to have a plan. But every time I would say something about that, Dave would respond with, but don't be a slave to your plan. Plans go out the window every day. In trampoline, you're doing a hard routine. You have to swap a trick just about every time. So you have to be able to improvise on the fly, and then that'll affect all your other jumps and change your whole routine. So learning how to be very fluid and adaptable was something that, this is a super obscure sport. I knew nothing about it. Another thing I did was get on a trampoline and actually get Dave to coach me. So to Sheldon's point, most coaches love coaching. If you're standing next to them, ask them to teach you something. One coach we've shared, Sam, is Brendan Arnold, and he was teaching me jumps on bikes all winter. Get coaches to actually teach you, and you'll get a sense of their coaching as well. And you'll learn. I've picked up so many cues from getting sport coaches to teach me their sport and tricks in their sport. So this was one of the first things that taught me how to be super adaptable, which I've carried on into all the action sports I work with now, because it's a different beast altogether. Constraints are the enemy in these acrobatic sports. So that was an interesting one, and I could go on a lot more stories, but same year I started working with this coach. Does anyone know who this is? Trivia time.
Mountain bike?
Nope. So this is Scott Oldershaw. This was the Olympic canoe kayak head coach. This is the royal family of paddling in Canada, pretty much. So his grandfather was an Olympian, paddled for Canada in the 50s. That was his father. Him and his brothers were both Olympians, paddled in the 80s. His son is an Olympian who's still trying to go to Tokyo. So there's 3 generations of success in this sport that has been passed down. And what are you going to tell 3 generations of Olympic medals as a young strength coach? You're going in. And his son is one of the strongest humans I've ever seen in my life for his size and his endurance. There's three generations of steel workers too. He would weld all the gym equipment they have in Burloak Club. So he makes gym equipment. So again, this guy knows, these coaches in the paddle sport know more about strength conditioning than any other sport I've worked with. So to a lot of the points that have been brought up, I just listened for the first while. I went into this environment because Adam had won, this was post Beijing. So Adam had just won silver. Mark had a hand surgery, so he didn't end up having the success that he wanted. And Scott had hit his limit with strength conditioning knowledge. So he wanted an injection of new knowledge. So he had a low enough ego to reach out and say, I want help. And I had just joined the Sport Institute full time. So they threw this sport at me because I paddled and I knew Adam. I actually went to university with Adam. So I had a bit of an in already. And if anyone knows or has worked with multiple world champions, Olympic medalists, the people who succeed time and time again, a very Michael Jordan-esque for Last Dance. It's actually a perfect example at the mindset of these people, because I've had them both in trampoline and canoe kayak. Not easy to get in with and to crack. So the fact that I was already friends with him was already an in, which is why they gave me that sport. honestly, after going to their first gym session, I was like, well, you guys know what you're doing. The program's legit. Let me just hang out and watch, and I'll just be around for your gym sessions. After about 3 weeks, I realized, you know what? Technique in the gym is something we can work on, and that was a weakness. So my first year was spent coaching up Scott's program. So I didn't do any programming. I just coached up the program that they were doing. And that got buy-in, and I didn't go in trying to change a bunch of stuff. Again, multiple Olympic medal winning program. It took 2 years for Scott to fully relinquish the S&C to me. So that's how long it took to get the buy-in. And again, I learned more from Scott than I could ever give to the sport, in my opinion. And I could do a whole lecture on the things I've learned from them. But to the point that came up about experience versus science, this is probably one of my favorite stories. So for the London Olympics, IST was the hot thing, and we had a high performance manager that was a science guy in Britain, and they wanted to put together the ultimate science boat. And what they do is they would do everyone in the individual boats, and they would measure them, measure their physiology, measure their biomechanics. And then through doing that, they put together what they thought was the best crew boat that was going to win. None of these guys were the guys that the coaches wanted. And again, 3 generations of coaching, there is an eye for what good paddling looks like, good technique, what 4 guys together, and a feel for what that boat looks and feels like. So the coaches were actually really pissed. So they put together what they called the spite boat, which was the anti-science boat. And when it came down to going to the Olympics, or who win it that year, spite boat destroyed the science boat. And if anything, it vindicated the coaches on experience over science. So be very, 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 very careful on choosing science and injecting it over coaches' experience. Use science in specific ways to validate the coach's eye, or maybe validate a point you're trying to make. But if you go all in on science first, it can backfire on you big time. So the experience spite boat won just about every time. And that's my story there. I think we'll stop that, Sam.
So I have a follow-up story to one of the first things you were saying in terms of like coach really isn't going to listen to you until you care, right? And one of the things that I feel very lucky that I learned this really early was I was involved in a lot of sports that I didn't have access to when I was a kid. So, you know, if you're working with volleyball or basketball or soccer or things like that, like you play that as a kid. But I got thrown into things like synchronized swimming, which is now artistic swimming, or track cycling or BMX, which I didn't even own a bike when I started working with cycling. Like didn't even own a road bike. Like I had no idea. But the provincial coach for synchronized swimming at the time, her name was Jen Coatley, and much like your experience where Dave asked you to meet him at midnight, they said, all right, we're going to meet at 4:30 at the pool in the morning because they train at like 4 a.m. before school. And I said, okay, I'll show up. So I show up and she hands me a Speedo and a cap and nose plugs and was like, all right, get in. And obviously I was game, like, yeah, but I didn't really even think about it. And to my ignorance, I think at the time, I don't know how and people do it all the time. Like obviously I'm working with football, but I never played football. But working with a sport that you have zero experience with, and especially a program that they feel so uncomfortable in your space, the gym is so foreign to them that you're asking them to step out of their comfort zone to step into your comfort zone. You gotta repay that service, like step into their comfort zone, which is your uncomfortable zone. And I think, Chapman, you mentioned this to me not late after that in terms of when I started working with cycling, was, you know, do the sport with them, and you're going to get a lot faster buy-in. Like the amount of buy-in that I got immediately from just jumping in the pool, wearing the same outfit that those athletes were, trying to, you know, tread water like under upside down, which if people don't know, when you try and do that, your ears automatically explode, which it was a horrific feeling to me. But it's so challenging. I was like, well, synchronized swimming, they do a lot of core work, you know, they got to hold positions. How hard can it be? It's very hard. Like, it's probably the hardest training session I've ever done. So that would be one of the greatest advice that was ever given to me was, you know, try the sport out, be within the sport. You talked about BA or Brendan Arnold. I did the same thing, like got on the BMX bike. I'd never been on a BMX bike my entire life, on a dirt track. It was one of the scariest things I've ever done, you know, and I just went off like the small hill, not the big hill. And yeah, absolutely terrified. But when I initially got the contract with cycling, again, I didn't own a bike. So I purchased a really cheap road bike and rode a little bit. And then the first thing that they wanted was for us to join them on the recovery rides. And the amount of conversation that I got out of the athletes outside of the gym was the most valuable time that I could have spent. But that wouldn't have happened if I wasn't pushed into a situation that I was a bit forced to be out of my comfort zone and into their comfort zone. So yeah, if they don't think that you care, then you're not really worth listening to it, in my mind. So I appreciate that, you sharing that, chat.
And the funny thing about all that, Sam, when they want to see you do stuff is, in my experience anyways, they know you're going to suck at it. And it's totally not the point. Like, lots of times you'll get the comment, oh, you're a bit better at that than I thought you were going to be or whatever. But it's totally not the point. Like, especially when you work, well, honestly, if it's a sport that you haven't done and it's above, it's the university level or above, or even high school in a lot of cases, they know they're going to be better than you at it and everything that's involved in it. And that's kind of reason why you're coaching and they're playing and all that kind of stuff. But especially when you get into like the PSOs and the NSOs, like they know you're going to suck, but they just want it. It's like the vulnerability piece and the understanding piece and just a little bit of it, but it's crazy how much capital you get that way. Can I share quick, Sam? Oh, I think I'm allowed. No.
You're allowed now, yeah.
People kept bringing this up, and in a presentation, I don't know, I think a few of you were there, but in a presentation I gave a while ago about monitoring, I was talking about how we love to talk about science sometimes, and we're presenting like the John Nash stuff, when in reality what is needed is the equation for the grade 5 volcano. And in reality, a lot of the coaches are doing this. So we say, well, oh, they didn't like the science aspect. But chaps, if you were to think about Oldershaw and his strength program, like whatever he used to measure, he knew the tonnage. He knew the number of sets. He knew however many hours of strength and conditioning it is, or something like that. And that's science, right? Like, do something, observe, track, adjust, change. And we think that you need to come in with this, you know, if you just learned something in a course in undergrad or master's and it's seemingly cutting edge, or whoever wrote the paper said it was cutting edge, we come in like off the top ropes when they're like, hey man, like a simple body slam will do okay here. It's been winning matches for a while. So I get a lot of laughs when I presented this initially, but I still think, and chaps, in that like kind of back end of the talk last week, we were talking about this, like a lot of us do a ton of arguing about the minutia at the really top end of these things. And I gave the example of the best athlete that I've ever worked with, by definition of kind of international success, does everything wrong. Like, based upon all the things that we like to argue about, all of it's wrong. But he's the best ever, or one of the best ever at it. So maybe we're all wrong, you know? And yeah, just really interesting to me when sometimes we don't think about it in that way.
To your point, Jordan, I mean, you know, people hate on periodization these days. It's planning. Canoe kayak use Tudor Bompa classic block periodization. It's simple, easy to understand. Athletes get it. So I came in at the time and I wasn't, you know, it wasn't my favorite model, but I stuck with it. And over the years, I actually dove into the science, and there's papers I can again, do a whole talk showing you why block is better for endurance sport. And so if I have a model that is more simple and the athletes are going to do it, even if it wasn't better, you know, the fact that they're going to do it is going to trump what a paper tells me to use another model. So you got to meet them where they're at a lot of the time, and go with what they use. Our best hypertrophy block, because I used to do Isaac skin folds before and after every block, was still at one of Coach's workouts, and we never took it out for all 8 years. You know, so I use science to actually validate his model and not try and inject my model.
And let's be real, like the hilarity that comes from that is that's just a program that you stole from a guy that you're working with, instead of a program that you stole from a guy that the coach doesn't know. That's kind of what a lot of us are doing, right? Like most of it's been done before. So it's like, if you can steal it from a guy that the coach doesn't know of, then he thinks it's your program, or you act like it's something that's never been done before. But I mean, you were lucky enough, and I guess humble enough, to just be like, well, it's right here, might as well do it. It's already written on the board. It's already printed off. He probably gave that program to you photocopied from a typewriter, did he?
No, he got one of his sons, who was another coach, to do it in Excel. So they did have an Excel template that they would staple on the board.
It was probably done in Quattro Pro.
You know, I remember Ed telling a story once about the first rowing coach he worked with, and the plan was always written on a napkin at the beginning of their block plan, or what have you, their block phase that they were doing. And to this day, he still writes it on a napkin. But knows what's going on. Like, it's all in his head, and he knows what's going on. So if you want to get information from him, then sit down and he'll talk you through the napkin, and then you can write it up in whatever way you see fit, but he recognizes it best on the napkin.
Two things. I meant to bring this up before, but the guys that were tight on time were talking. Ed told me about rowing. There's only one thing that's directly like 1-to-1 correlated to their medal output, was the number of barbecues that he hosted and invited the coaches. It's the best thing that they had in rowing, and it was kind of like a relationship piece, right? And obviously cherry picked and all that kind of stuff. But because I was like, geez, we're running. I thought we were running long or short on time. We had a lot of time, but we don't have that much. I want to ask Sam a question. I didn't prompt this, but a little bit of background first. I've never played football. I ended up working a lot in football. First football I worked in was high school, then next in the CFL for the Ticats, and then at University of Guelph. I tried to use my new look at it, which has become very common now for sure, and was nothing special to be fair, as an advantage. So early on, they were like, well, the guys that I worked with early on in the high school were buddies of mine. So they knew I didn't play football, and they knew I wasn't trying to say that I didn't play football. So that helped. But in the CFL, there was a little bit of that. And then early on in the university setting, but I tried to use principles and different sport experiences to back it up to create buy-in. Sam, I know that you and I have talked about this a bunch when you started at York, like point out some of the obvious things. Sam never played university football. She played high-level rugby, like national team for a number of years. Obviously, university football, I don't think there's currently any females playing. I think there's one female on a team at Quebec, actually. Predominantly male, as far as I know. It's all male at York, and all the coaches are men, I believe. There are a few female coaches in the NFL now, and through the levels and all that kind of stuff. So if you think about commonalities and tradition of which football is a really traditional sport, and in my experience, one that's really, really tough to get things to change. Can you talk about like some of the things early on at York that you used to create buy-in, to create a relationship with your head coaches and your assistants, and then also some of the things maybe that did not go so well?
Yeah, this question was definitely not prompted. So
yeah, like hide what you got to hide and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But there's not many people on here now. If you look.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I've tried to do well is leverage all the networks that I have in terms of the lessons that they learned and the things that failed for them. And obviously I picked Jordan's brain a lot to be like, like, tell me everything you know about football. Like I barely even watched it, to be honest. Like depending on who's listening here, like knowing that there was an O and a D probably 6 years ago, like I didn't know, like I wasn't interested in it. I didn't have a football program in my high school, anything like that. But one of the things that I have probably struggled with, and I've talked to Sheldon and Chaps and Trev for sure about this, is like, you know, your ability to, one of the easiest ways that I've found for some of my colleagues to get buy-in is to challenge athletes in the gym and like really, you know, be big screamers and yellers and get people at it. And that's just really not my approach. Also, I think that I'm okay strong, but definitely can't compete with football players. But I think the approach that I took was more like really giving a shit about them. And I think to give a shit about them, you need to be around a lot. And also trying to always explain the reasons why things are happening so that they can also come to the table to have some sort of input. So I'm not sure if it's much of a secret or not, but the program that they had previous was probably a typical, you know, you just get the shit kicked out of you, and you know, it's a pretty barbaric, got yelled at a lot. There wasn't a lot of coaching, I would say, taking place. So what I tried to do was find the areas in which the coach was probably unhappy with the way things had gone before. And whatever the coach really wanted at that time to get coach buy-in, I essentially did that immediately, like immediately. So one of the things from a coach buy-in perspective, and this might sound a little bit silly, but the head football coach really wanted a personal best bell in the gym, like a bell that you could ring, that when someone achieved something, like they could ring it. And that had been something he'd wanted for like 10 years. So I bought a really cheap bell off of Kijiji from a farmer down south, and I painted it up and I put it in the gym. And I think that was kind of really started our relationship in terms of I was listening to some of the things that I might have thought were really silly. But for him, you know, having something like that in the gym was so important to be able to build morale, and it was new and fresh and flashy, and the football team really thought it was theirs. And, you know, I think that was the beginning of something exciting. But also the gym at York hadn't really been updated in quite some time. So I put a lot of flashy leadership boards and signs in it. And, you know, when people showed up for training camp, they were like, oh, this now doesn't look like a bit of a hole in the wall. Like there's things, like we're actually motivated to kind of be in here. We want to be in here. And I'm not to say that the environment was poor before, but, you know, when you throw up a few things of paint, things change. So, yeah, I'll talk about the pie award for sure, Trevor. So I think those are a couple things that I started with. And then I'm not sure, I think the culture that's typically in football, I find really interesting, a bit of that military type of, you know, people kind of do what they're told. But I took a bit of a different approach where I wanted the athletes to have an opportunity to set their own culture, instead of me just stepping in and telling them what to do. So I think that helped a little bit. And then, like I said, I spend a lot of time actually being around them at practice and admitting that I'm not really sure what you're doing. Can you explain that to me a little bit more? Joining in on some of the drills to kind of get a better idea. Essentially putting myself in embarrassing positions, I think, was actually quite helpful. You'd be surprised how much they really just want to see you get the shit kicked out of you, and then they, you know, appreciate you. So yeah, I'd say that those were probably one of the main ones. And then I do this thing where, and I stole it from someone for sure, where, and it takes a lot of time, but, you know, I interview every single athlete and I kind of get to know them a little bit in terms of, I don't know, people might not know, but our York demographic, especially our football and basketball program, is probably a little bit lower on the socioeconomic status. And for me to walk in, I'd say as a white female, and tell them, you know, that this is going to be hard, the hardest thing that you've ever done, is probably not appropriate. So I really tried to get to know them on their level in terms of, you know, where did you come from? What adversities have you been through? Understanding that I actually didn't know a whole lot about their culture, or the culture, some of the cultures that most of the athletes were in. So yeah, I let them play whatever rap music that they want. That was actually the easiest way to get buy-in. No one's in the gym at 6 or 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. No one's in the building. Play whatever you want. Stuff like that. So we dance a lot, which I say I don't dance a lot, but they really like to dance. So they dance throughout their training, which might sound weird, but most of them actually get credits for a lot of dance classes on campus because they're legitimately good, like I'd say hip hop dancers. Yeah, not sure if I'm nailing on the head any of that stuff that you're thinking of, Jordan, but I think another thing was easy lifts that they were so technically horrible. Like their technical ability to lift was actually quite bad. So even doing something like a jump shrug or something like a rack pull shrug or a rack shrug, like I could roll in and do 100 kilos for reps pretty easy, which is not a lot of weight. Like that's very easy. But for them, they had no idea what that was. Like the technique of it was really hard for them. So they would blow their mind that I could do that. But then once they got used to the technique, they realized that that actually isn't very hard, and it's not surprising at all. So a couple of those things I would say really helped me. But I'd say number one for sure was, what did the coach want? And I also sat down with the leadership team and I asked them what they wanted, and I pretty much let them drive the culture.
Noise. Yeah. One of the themes from there, and it's like going into anything, is you just got to be highly prepared, right? So it's not always looking up research papers to find out what the best sets of reps are for training Canadian football, which I think there's 3 articles probably. But it's what's the team dynamic, what's the history of it, what is the culture of football, and like all of which are things that you can kind of find out. Yeah, like the head coach. This will describe some football strength and conditioning, not incriminate Sam. One of the head coaches that I worked with at Guelph, who was great, literally one day, and fortunately we had a good relationship by this time because I don't even know how I would answer this now. He was just like, yeah, so when I was in my best shape playing football, I would just do 10 sets of 10 overhead squat with 2 plates and 10 sets of 10 hang clean with 275. I was in great shape, so we should just get all the guys doing that. So I told him, like, get the fuck out of the weight room, and that was that. And I was like, hey, man, you want to tell me how to do my job? I know you got enough to do, so why don't you go do that? And he was like, yeah, you're right, I do. And he just left. But like that is legitimately where, and we were one of the top programs in the country. And you know what? If all of our players could do that, we probably would have been like pretty good, pretty good in the weight room. But I also probably would have hurt literally every single one. But that's kind
German
of
volume, man.
Yeah, that guy was a beast. Like that was our head coach. His name's Kevin McNeil. He's at Western now, and like super hard. He would not, like, this is not intelligent, for instance, but he would walk up sometimes because our weight room was above his office. He would just come up for a while. He would do it every single day, and just bench 225 as many times as he could, like in his khakis. And just I think he did it until he got hurt and then he stopped. But he got up to like 14 reps or something like that. Literally, just every day he would walk up, and if there was someone benching, he'd just be like, he would go over and be like, how many times can you do 225? And they would say some number, and he'd be like, okay, put it on there. And he would do it and walk away. And then I think he actually finally got hurt. He walked up when guys were doing cleans one time. He's like, oh, I can do this. And he mangled himself and left, and that was that. But that's kind of like some of the culture that you're working with. The great side of it is if you do your homework and you know that once you get their buy-in, they'll work hard for you.
Yeah, I mean, there was a comment on here. I'm just reading through this while I was chatting, but that like they would never work out with your team while you're coaching. And I would definitely disagree. Like I think the biggest amount of buy-in I've gotten, and we're kind of veering off from sport coaches to athletes, is the biggest amount of buy-in that I've probably gotten from my athletes is joining them even in some lifts. Like the most buy-in that we get from from the programs that buy in and where I am at York is that the coaches lift with their athletes. Like that's huge. And then the fact that, you're willing to put yourself into a position and lift with them. Like you were talking about Corey, Jordan, like the thing that he hated the most, the wrestler, was that you're there sitting in, I don't know, that Tom had a gym that had a recliner in it. it was a weird setup, but like sitting there just barking orders. I'm pretty sure that's what Trev did. But like Corey hated it when you're just standing there barking orders at him. Like, you know, just get in there. And if I'm going to be there at 5:30 in the morning anyways, like I might as well get a lift in. I mean, that's one-on-one, but I'll say some of the football guys, the best buy-in that I got is when we had a small group randomly just based on something. I just got in and lifted with them, and they're like, no coach has ever lifted with me. Like, I have never had that experience in my life. And I was like, well, there you go. Like, and it was like instantly after that, and these were some of our big leaders, top dogs on the team. Like, I had buy-in, like, no problem. So, you know, I really think if you're not going to be able to lift with your athletes based on, you know, you got to be able to teach them what they're doing and all that stuff, and you got to be focused. You got to find a way to engage with them in some way that I guess might not be in the gym, but I've got some of my best buy-in doing that.
I would usually do it with guys like I would just be, because when I was at Guelph, my schedule was like ridiculous. So the ones that couldn't sort out their timetable enough, and I had this alternate lift time, I'd just be like, and some guys I wouldn't let them. I'd be like, you can't lift during this time because honestly, I'm not going to be paying attention to you, and you haven't put in the time on your own to like be good enough at this shit. Do it with minimal supervision. So, and they would like get their act together and then do it. And I'd be training. But one time during exams, I hope somebody. So I want to say he's the best athlete I've ever seen. Ian might know who he is, and I don't know if Kevin was around during this time. His name is Keyshawn Powell. He was on the track team and the football team for 1 year at Guelph. I think he's at York now, actually, Sam. So the things I've seen this kid do, he was a triple jumper, one offset triple jump, like, but didn't even have an approach, like crazy stuff. Almost long jumped 8 meters, like would fall 5 times and then jump 7, 6 feet, like crazy things. He when he came, it was tough, and he was super talented. Didn't really put a ton of time into the schoolwork, but matured a lot. And he was in that Monday time slot that was this extra time slot, and he was late almost every time. And we knew that he was a project guy, and you know, so depending on the week, whatever my response would be, but it was usually hard. And we were trying to get this guy to get his shit together because we knew that if he did, he could be an unbelievable. So he was like crazy late, you know, 1 week, and literally the next week, like runs up the stairs and jumps into the weight room at 3:59:59, and the workout's at 4, right? And like runs around the corner. He's like, "Oh, coach, I'm here." And I'm like, "Dude, it's like exams started this week and there are no workouts." So cool, you're on time, but there's literally no workouts, and like, shouldn't you be studying or whatever? So the guy was like crazy dejected. So I'm like, you know what? I'm about to work out. Let's do this. I said, I don't like, there's no workouts planned, so you're just gonna do what I'm doing. And this kid's like 6'1", 170, like just all tendon, right? Like doesn't have a muscle belly on him. And we're doing squats, and somehow this kid squatted, I can remember 335 for 8 that day. I don't know. He might have been like crippled for the rest of the week for all I know. But after that, like I would do anything I ever asked him to do. And even to the point where he ended up leaving Guelph after that year and was banging around for probably about 2 years before I think he landed at York now. But I used to see him up at the track center when I was working at AC, and he would always come over. And hey, coach, he had this really deep voice. Hey, coach, how you doing, man? If I had only listened to you guys. Like this guy, if you get a chance to be around him, like I can remember 2 quick stories I'll tell about him. I already told the longest one, but he was a track and field guy, kinda, but he didn't know what a flying sprint was. So I kind of assumed that he did, and we were just doing like 20 plus 20, essentially flying sprints later on in our workouts in the summer 1 year. And so I'm like, yeah, we're just doing flying sprints. You know what that is, right? And he's like, yeah. So he just goes. And so he would just like start out and do a gradual accel where guys would do a proper build. And then when he got to the cone, he would literally just do a re-accel and torch everybody. Like it wasn't like a gradual accel into a get upright and push harder down into the ground and be taller and all that kind of stuff. He was that talented where, and like some of the guys that he was pulling away from, like one guy ran a 4.5 electric at the CFL Combine, and he would just re-accel and torch through this guy. In the same workout, we were doing 10-fold broad dumps, and he was like, "What are we trying to do here?" It's just like, consecutive broad jumps, man. Just, I'm sure you've done this before in track. Just jump as far as you can. And he goes, and it's like legit 5 meters further than anybody else. And then the most impressive thing I've ever seen him do, at York and Guelph or any other track, you see these fences that are like low chest height to keep people from walking onto the track. This guy was doing a track workout because he was part of the track team too. So he walked over, and the fountain is on the other side of it. So you could walk like 5 meters to go around the fence, or you could jump over the fence, which is, he's just like, whoop, just crazy 2-footed hop, jumps over, gets a drink, whoop, crazy 2-footed hop back over onto the track, and just walks back to doing his thing. But keep an eye out, Keyshawn Powell, Sam.
Yeah, he's on our track team.
He's unreal.
So we haven't heard anything from Ian over here. He's being quiet in the corner, and I know he's got lots of cool stories for us. And then we're going to pass it off for Trev to finish off. But Ian, we want to hear a story from you. Tell us a good story about sport coaches, lessons that you've learned.
I don't know what to say. I was gone for 20 minutes, half an hour. I guess, I heard Jordan earlier talking about, being in an environment where you got to learn how to be a team member and look out for what's important first. That way you're, I guess, better suited to actually, make an effect on people, like being intentional with knowing people, knowing their names and stuff, but also helping with the buy-in from the coach's side. You kind of got to manage the friendship side in a sense first, and then you'll probably get, an opportunity to do something. But stories about coaches, the one thing, like Chris would know this one coach, his name was Tony D'Oliveira, and he used to coach Anson for a while, and he started coaching the boys, and there was things that, like, he introduced me to a lot of the chiropractors that I learned, a lot of the, I guess, physiological responses that people would need, or how they got to be put in shape and get ready and prepared to actually run, and what they would work on. But Kevin Tyler probably is one of the coaches I spent the most time with, in a sense. It was about a couple of years, and the things I learned from him, I realized that when all these people, I've got so many people on the list of who I've met. I went up to Scott Livingston's crib for a weekend and just learned how he operated and what was going on his side. But I think the best thing, if nobody's mentioned it or somebody's probably mentioned it, but it's just to be alongside somebody and watch them and learn and ask questions, because some of the coaches, like, I remember seeing Dan Paff, and a guy would run by, same with Kevin, and he'd tell you exactly what's going on. I would see something, like almost like in the Matrix, that deja vu, you'd see something, but I'd have to go back to film and, oh, okay, there it is. But these guys had literally, they could hear things, they could see things, and they can make their adjustments on the fly. And that's one of the things that, I'm not even close to that yet. I'm getting better at certain things, but if it wasn't for film, couldn't hold a candle. But these guys could actually just look, and see what's going on. And, I'm old enough, we were back, training with, at York, and we'd see Charlie, and we'd see Ben, and we'd see Angela, we'd see all these guys. And I think you just pick up from them and from him. You just sit back, watch, learn. If you have the opportunity to ask questions, it's great, because the coach will talk your ear off, in a sense. But I think it's just sitting back, learning, and then when you do learn something, you try and apply it later on. But yeah, I've had so many individuals that, would give you the time. They'd say, yeah, come on down. And you have some great talks, great conversations, and all you have to do is ask. Like, you're going to run into somebody who's like, yeah, I don't know you from a hill or Adam or anything. I don't want to deal with you, but that's fine and dandy. I mean, you can still read about things they've done, or, try and incorporate some of the things you actually observe yourself. But if you have the opportunity to see some of these guys that, are mentor-like coaches, that, yeah, it's worth the shot. Go see them and listen to them and talk to them, and you'll learn so much. It's incredible. But
Ian, even
I
the
don't know
ones that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead, buddy.
Go ahead.
Oh, even the ones that don't want to share in a mentorship way, I found that some of them will share even more for the ego side, but the winner ends up being you because you learn about the
Yeah.
sport, right? And
Yeah.
track, some of those coaches are the ones that know the most technically. They might not get the people piece as much, but technically is where we would be lacking, right, in a sport
Yeah. Yeah.
of what we would know the least about. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're so right. It's an ego thing, and I think more football. We used to go down to, Michigan and Penn State, and we'd go to football clinics, and guys I'd coach against, we were all buddy and friends and everything else. I understand when you're on the field together, it's different, but track is one of those things that everything's proprietary. Nobody knows. Like, I've got this secret little thing here that nobody else knows, and I'm like, I really don't care. I will tell anybody anything and everything, because at the end of the day, you're developing your own philosophy anyways. You're developing your flow. You're developing all, your menu of things that you like and don't like. The number of webinars and coaching sessions I've been on for the last 3 weeks, everybody's different. there's more than one way to skin a cat, but it's what you're comfortable with and what you can actually do. And then if a client asks you, well, hey, why are you doing this? And you don't have an answer, then you've got a problem. But if you can answer, say, this is why I'm doing it, because I want this response from you, then they start to, okay, all right, and they'll buy in easier. But yeah, I mean, that's why I love this, because the amount of knowledge and being shared and everything else, it's great. And the stories, because you can then pick out things and apply it to yourself. So
to that point, Ian, we need to do the same thing with the coaches, is ask them why. I presented at a conference in New York, and we filmed a podcast after with all the presenters. And one of the questions from the audience was, you have a coach that wants to do workouts that are X, Y, Z, and you don't agree with them. And, down there, the mentality was very shit on the coach. And my response to it, after everyone gave their response, was, well, did anyone ask the coach why they're doing this? And everyone, literally the room went silent. It was really weird. And there was Nate Harvey, a West Side Barbell guy next to me, just started laughing. He's like, this is why we need to invite you Canadians down more. Just like, because the American mindset was just to F the sport coach. I'm doing what I'm doing as a strength coach. And it was bizarre, but just ask why.
Don't you think it's backwards up here, though? You think it's the other way around?
I don't know. That's a great question.
Depends on the sport.
Yeah, it depends on the sport for sure.
Yeah.
Sam, can I do a call out? I want to hear from Vicky Bendis if she's able to. And the reason why is she's probably one of the best athletes we have on this. So I was fortunate enough to be a strength coach for Vicky at Hockey Canada, and she's now working at York. And I would be curious to know.
Brock. I think she's at.
Yeah, sorry, at Brock.
At Brock.
The other red beast. And I would be curious if she's able to, what lessons she learned from coaches that she's carried over now that she's transitioned from national team athlete to strength coach.
Sure.
And high end, Vicky, did you have the goal scoring record at a time? Like, aren't you like one of the better players of all time?
I did win an NCAA award at one point back in the day.
Just to qualify that.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, you guys have kind of touched on a lot of those qualities, that as an athlete, kind of going through my, career as a young athlete and then a collegiate athlete and a national team athlete, that I valued. And, it truly, truly does come back to just feeling like the coach is in your corner and, is going to do everything possible to help you and that they care about you. And I think someone mentioned it last week, or perhaps I read it. Everything blends together now when you're on a lot of webinars. But, as you kind of progress through, being a collegiate athlete to, if you're able to make that step to a national team athlete, and in that kind of elite type realm, is when you're the younger kind of athlete trying to make that jump, or at least I know I did, I tended to seek the advice of lots of different coaches and try to get a lot of different opinions on things, on what I should be doing and what I need to work on. And then, I realized as I was going and, and I was kind of turning almost, more so into like that professional mentality, that, I tried to keep my circle of coaches smaller. And it was really those people that, I just trusted, that they always had my best interests at heart, in both, from an athlete standpoint and a personal standpoint. And, those are, certainly values that I try to, hold true as a coach. And, I have, because I kind of get to work with, some Hockey Canada athletes and some Wrestling Canada athletes, I see, some athletes going through similar type phases, with their relationships with strength and conditioning coaches. And, I understand that. And I don't take it personally when some of those athletes, maybe they're asking, opinions of those different strength coaches and looking for all the answers, or maybe the easy fix, I don't know. But then you see them progress, and then, as they, get it, maybe it's more mature or just get really dialed in, you kind of see them start to do that less and less. And they really kind of hone in on those people that are, within their tight circle, and they try to, I think, eliminate a little bit of that noise. And, the coaches that remain in the circle are truly those ones that, they trust the most, and, they know that are there for them. And chaps, I don't know if that answers your question at all, but that's kind of been a bit of my experience so far with, as an athlete, my interaction with strength and conditioning coaches anyway.
For sure. And I think Trev said it in the comment here, it comes back to trust is what everything's pointing to in the end. Question number 2 for you, Vicky, and maybe it's a battle against Sam, is who would win, a Badger or a Lion in the Battle of the Red Machines?
Well, that's a great question. And if we're trying to be, objective, we would probably just have to test that out at some point, I think.
Probably illegal.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that would probably be valid.
I'll just stand by you, Vicky. Let's just stand by you.
Yeah.
Support coaches instead of tearing them down,
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I think a Lion would win.
Yeah, I mean, what are you guys? What's a Badger? Do we know what that is?
It's a fierce,
Yeah.
small
Any Badger don't give a
animal that'll rip your throat out.
Is it kind of like a raccoon? Like, I don't know.
Yeah,
Like a small bear, isn't it?
like a Wolverine type
groundhog,
thing.
raccoon, big claws.
Hybrid. A
Ferocious.
survivor.
Right. I think everyone knows what a lion is, so I think we've established that one. No. No, thanks for your insight. That was a great question, chaps. Thanks, Vicky.
No problem.
Yeah, it's just trust. Is that what you're saying, Trev? You want to end us with how you've garnished so much trust with all of your coaches and athletes in the past? This is going to be good.
I don't know if I'll garnish that or not, but honestly, I'm never one for false enthusiasm, and I think my athletes appreciate that from me, because false enthusiasm sometimes takes away that trust. So many times athletes want you to tell them how great they're doing, even though they're not. And some people would say, yeah, that's a good thing, build them up. But sometimes you got to be downright honest and say, yeah, I think you can do this, or no, I don't think that's possible. And if they have trust, they really come to you and ask you those questions again and again. And when you give them a response, they say, all right, well, I'll just have to work harder. I get that every day from young athletes. Do you think I can bench 300 by the time I'm 18? Those kinds of questions. And once they have trust and you give them an answer and give them a solution to, if they can't achieve that, what they have to do to get close to that, then they kind of buy in. But I was just going to wrap up because we're pretty much out of time here. I don't have a lot of great lessons. Honestly, in my time, most coaches I worked with was when I was quite young in the sport, and there were a lot of bad coaches. So I learned a lot of things of what not to do. But I was amazed when I first went to Northern Arizona University back in 1995, when coming out of football and hockey and basketball, and just having a lot of coaches whose coaching theories were basically, if they don't do it, yell, and if they still don't learn, yell louder, and then punish them. And like you just never knew what was going to happen, or bench them. Yeah, if they don't do it well, bench them. That was kind of the mentality, and you still see that sometimes in some coaches if you watch some of those TV shows like Last Chance U's. But I was amazed when I went to Arizona to actually see coaches as teachers, and because I really like that. I always appreciated that approach, and I always took that approach, and I built on that approach as coaching as teachers. So nothing novel there. Most of you here know that. But then I was fascinated when I started coaching and being your coach as a teacher, and again, not giving up false enthusiasm. I had a young athlete who was doing quite well, an international level lifter. And he kind of got mad with him one day, and he says, "Why don't you ever scream at me? I see when I was in high school, I had a coach that screamed at me, and I really liked it. And I see other coaches that are screaming all the time. Why don't you scream at me? I wish you'd scream at me. I think I'd lift more if you screamed at me." And that was a bit of a wake-up call for me, and I had to think about it for a minute. Why don't I? And my response to him was because that's not my coaching style. And, if you don't like that, then that's just not how I roll. And sometimes an athlete is just better with a different coach. And sometimes I work my athletes up to a certain point, and sometimes I feel like I've done what I can, and sometimes they need maybe a screamer. And I'm not one to be a screamer unless I really want to scream. So maybe there's a few instances where I have to do that. So sometimes you just got to let your athlete find the right coach. And it comes down to when you have a championship team, it's kind of like we talked about earlier. It's not all the best athletes that are on the team. It's all the best fit for that team and that coach. And so understand that sometimes you'll have that fit and sometimes you won't. And it's a good coach that tries to build the fit around them. And that's how you get to the winning program. That's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Trev. Can't say you've never yelled, not once, at Corey maybe?
Oh, I yell. Yeah, I'll yell, but it's not,
just the manufactured false bullshit stuff of like,
yeah,
people want to make it seem more complicated too, right? Like, really,
yeah.
like, just lift the weight, man. Like, you need me to scream in your face every time you need to do something of value? Like, give me a break.
Yeah, find your own motivation. That's what, you get athletes come back. I want you to really fire me. I said, I can fire you up today. I can scram you today, or I can give you some epinephrine or something, some speed pills or something, if that's what you want, maybe some amphetamines. I can do all those things for you today. But ultimately, what's going to happen 3 years from now when you're still trying to train and you're on your own and you're in your garage or you're just trying to get things done? You got to find it inside yourself. Look around. I'm lucky at the vault. We have a lot of world level lifters who have been multi-time world level champions and record holders. And I said, look around, watch how they train, watch how they get ready for a lift. Look at their focus. Do you see them sitting there nothing but yelling and screaming? No, they're digging into themselves. Find it inside of you to build yourself up and to put yourself into the bar instead of me artificially slapping you upside the head and pretending I'm excited.
Well, look at the situation we're in now, right? Like, if you don't have that innately in you, it's going to be a rough ride. It's going to be a rough training ride for the next little while.
Kids coming back. Yeah, so I don't know if we want to finish up maybe just in 1 minute. Anybody heard anything about some of the return to play stuff going on in the U.S.? Some kids have already come back. I've heard rumors of rhabdomyolysis running around, and greater ratios of kids vomiting than in the past. Has anybody heard anything else?
Not from the U.S., but the numbers from like Premiership soccer in Europe are brutal.
Yeah,
people getting hurt
right.
tenfold.
Cramping.
Yeah, and they have like full support teams around all these people. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, ready for that.
We're looking at something in our realm of questioning, like around occupational fitness tests and the defensibility of it. If somebody comes back after this period and they say that they couldn't train as normal and they fail a job required test, is it legally defensible? It's kind of the same as in sport, right? Like if you're a pro athlete, you come back from this, you might be like, hey man, I'm going to sue you guys. Or even a university athlete that could go pro, like, yeah, it'll be interesting to see some of the stories out of all this.
Yeah, and just so you guys know, for anybody who works with provincial sports teams, if you haven't heard, Phase 1 allows for athletes to retrain, working with a coach, as long as it's an individual athlete and social distancing. I was a little confused. I read the guidelines, and the guidelines were just, yeah, sure, no problem, train your athletes, but then it turns out that you can't. You have to work through your PSO, make sure the PSO has a policy in place. The PSO has to get an approval from the ministry. The ministry was caught with their pants down, as they often are in these cases. They put out that Phase 1, said, hey, great, it's time to train, but we got to kind of give you some oversight. They proceeded to have about 2 million phone calls come into the office trying to figure out if people could return or not. And people are now rapidly trying to buy up memberships to weightlifting associations and track and field associations so they can have permission to go back to the gym.
Love it.
So it's going to be a boon for some of these associations.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. Really appreciate all the stories. We'll post this one up and stay tuned to what we have next. Thanks again for everyone that contributed. It was awesome.
Okay. Thanks, guys.